Well, the program at 345 is A Path Forward for New Jersey Black Press in New Jersey. Well, the Black press in New Jersey. And it's about understanding the press as an integral role in the community engagement and thriving communities. But before I introduce you to the guests, it's important I give you a little history about the Black press, okay? So first of all, what is the Black press? Why is the Black press critical, essential, and fundamental for the Black community and the sustainability of our rich and textured culture that everyone else seems to want to co-opt? What is the Black press? The Black press is a term used to describe newspapers and magazines that are published by and for African Americans. It's been an important aspect of African American history and culture, serving as a public sphere for an aggrieved community barred from the mainstream channels of discourse. The Black press has been central to community formation, protest, advocacy, education and literacy, and economic self-sufficiency. Since the earliest known Black-owned and published newspaper, Freedom's Journal, was founded in 1827, the Black press has provided a platform for African Americans to disseminate their ideas, accomplishments, and cultural products within their communities and to the rest of the world. The Black press has played a dual role, serving as a purveyor of news and information and as an agent of social change. It has always been a source of Black American political power, and even among the most commercial ventures, it is a defender of shared values and interviews, and that's according to the Oxford Press. Now, what are some of the original press that we know of? Well, there's several notable African American newspapers, and I'm gonna talk about press in terms of paper because we're a little different. Paper wasn't our only way to communicate. You had the Freedom Journal I spoke of, the Chicago Defender, the Richmond Planet, the Pittsburgh Courier, and later we had, in the city of Newark, wasn't a paper, but we had the Stuff magazine for those of you old enough to remember. And I'll talk about radio because we had WNJR. So, having said that, our press, as I said, was determined by the needs of our community and culture. Hence, we were not limited to communication in the form of paper. We have communicated with one another culturally prior and in numerous forms before, during, and after our kidnapping from the continent Africa, which was really called Ethiopia, through the Middle Passages, up through the 20th century. What were some of the things we used to communicate? Drums initially, but our oppressor found out that that was just not music, but a form of our way of communicating with one another, letting us know what was going on. We used quilts as maps for the Underground Railroad. We used music, slave spirituals, about how to escape the conditions of chattel slavery. Later, music for communication that would take the work of and scholars of our Black professionals, not so much professionals, but educators like Amiri Baraka and a host of others we don't have enough time to name. But it was a way to communicate to the masses of the many Black people who could not read. It's where we got, the music is where we got, I'm Black and I'm proud. The music is where we got Black power. We didn't say that. That wasn't in the newspapers. We got that from our culture, cultural ways of communicating. We got it from children's games. That was a way to communicate. Dance and radio, which served to help rally folks through the civil rights movement. Even the Pullman porters who dropped off Black newspapers along the train routes played a role. One might consider them our United States Post Office. Now, the Post Office is the only government agency mentioned in the Constitution of the United States. It existed before the United States, but ours was that, but we couldn't use it initially. It wasn't open to us. So the Pullman porters became our post office, dropping the newspapers along their route. And more recently, not real recent, even as late as the radio, syndicated radio personality, Michael Baston, who used the radio as a form of communication to gain support for the Gen 6 and had people from all over the country come into this high school in response to nooses that were hung. Notice that virtually all these forms of black press or forms of communication were wholly supported financially by black people. This was essential to telling the news and stories from the vantage point of holistic black culture perspective without having it vetted by our oppressors who were responsible for our conditions that made it necessary for us to be in communication with each other. Remember, the press serves as the first draft of history. If the community does not control the form and content of the community's communication, its community and culture will not be served. So I just wanted to share that with you before I introduced everybody. I hope that was helpful. All right, along those lines, I want to start, I'm going to have each person introduce themselves and give a little bit about their background and how they came to the importance of the black press. So we're going to start with Penda Howe, who's from New Jersey Urban News. I'm still trying to figure out how he knows about Stuff magazine, but go ahead. And also the numbers, because remember, the Stuff was where you got the numbers from, for those of you who know about that. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. Penda Howell, I'm the founder, publisher, CEO of New Jersey Urban News. I describe our publication as a weekly newspaper in digital format. You can find us online at njurbannews.com. We also publish 3 newsletters a week. We're launching a podcast next week around wealth building, both financial and health in the black community. I came to the black press sort of organically. I started out in general market media, and with general market, I mean your daily newspapers that you see in New Jersey, right? The Bergen Record, the Herald News. I started out at those companies and worked and plied my trade. I was on the business side of the media operations, and I got to a point where I felt like I wanted to contribute, stand on the back of the men and women that came before me in the black press. The Sun was going out of business in Newark, and that was extremely depressing to me because I didn't know of another outlet in New Jersey that reported on our community in the way they did, and I wanted to add capacity to that in New Jersey, and that's the reason why I started New Jersey Urban News.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. Mr. Thomas, thank you for joining us.
My name is Al Thomas. I'm the publisher of South Jersey Communications. We publish 4 newspapers, the South Jersey Journal, which is right there on the table, the Atlantic City Journal, the West Philly Journal, and the Uptown Chronicle. My career path was a little different. Back in the 1980s, we published a publication called griot, which is a French African word that means storyteller. So we told the role that African Americans and whites play in African American history. So we sent kids to Senegal and Gambia to actually meet live griots and do a historical tour. So after that, I worked 20 years as advertising and marketing director of the Philadelphia Tribune newspaper. So then we transitioned for 13 years for our 4 publications, and I'll tell you more about some of the things that we're doing. Thank you.
Okay. The next person is the younger one, Cassandra Ateen. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah.
I used to have French, but I don't remember anything, but go ahead.
It's quite all right. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. My name is Cassandra Ateen, as Linda said. I am glad to be on this panel. I'm here in the capacity of a think tank, if you will. I work at the Center for Cooperative Media currently. I do also have a background in journalism. Just to give you some information about the work of the center. So the Center for Cooperative Media is based at the School of Media, Communication and Media at Montclair State University. And for the past 11 years, the center has been engaged in the work of supporting a growing and thriving press in New Jersey, and also supporting an informed society in New Jersey and beyond. As part of this work, we do a lot of research. We launch collaborative projects. We have tons of programming, and including the flagship program, which is the New Jersey News Commons. Essentially, this is a growing community of 200 plus journalists, media creators, and local news stakeholders who are not necessarily in the business of newsmaking, but are concerned with the health of the news industry in our state. And I'd be happy to talk more about what the center does, but the reason why I'm on this panel is because in the last year or so, the center has done some research and has sought to foster collaboration about New Jersey's growing Black press. And so last spring we had a gathering of about nine or so out of 12 that we've identified. We've identified 12, but we know there's many more Black-led publications in the state. I have a handout that I think was placed on the tables for everyone. It's like 12 to 14 outlets and counting, right? So we know that we're missing some, and if you know that there are some that are not on here that we should be aware of, please let us know. And so we gathered this group together. 9 out of the 12 that we've identified were present, including the members of the panel here, Josie, who you hear from, of Public Square Amplified, and Penda of NJBIC News, and really just got together to try to see how we can work together to advance the goals of the Black press, figure out what those goals are, and how we can better serve our readership and communities.
Thank you. Josie Gonzalez.
Thank you, Linda. Is this on?
It should be.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to be here, and this is a real treat for me.
Can you speak up a little, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's a real treat for me because I'm sitting on this stage with my 2 co-founders of Public Square Amplified. That's Linda McDonald Carter and Cassandra Etienne. And so Public Square Amplified was launched in October 2021. I come to the news business not as a journalist or having worked in journalism or as a publisher or the head of a news entity. I come to journalism because I saw the gaps in civics and civic education, not just in Newark, in this city or in this state, but as an immigrant and someone from the Caribbean who's still a citizen of my island in the Caribbean. There's an eroding of civics and an eroding of a democracy. And vital to our democracy and vital to civics is a healthy, thriving, independent press. And so Public Square Amplified was launched to center community, to center justice, and to center race. That's our value proposition. And we're using journalism as a tool of civics and civic engagement. And we're doing it with, and let me acknowledge, we have one of our young community reporters in the audience, Kelly McIntyre, who has a journalism degree from Rutgers, Newark. We do it by training young community reporters, community residents, to write their stories, to write the news, to center their narrative and to drive their narrative. We know that if we're not owners of our apparatus and owners of our narrative, then we render ourselves objects of other people's narratives. And so we want to be the subject of our narratives. And I look forward to talking more about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie. I so appreciate
McDonald
that.
Carter, yes.
Okay. So we're going to start with Cassandra because she's the youngest one. And Cassandra's going to tell us about where our news and our form of communication is now and what impact it's having. And then, just to let Josie know in advance, we'll be talking about the FCC and its role. But we're going to start with Cassandra, and then we're going to come to, Go ahead.
All right. No pressure at all.
No pressure.
So I talked a bit about the research that the center does. Essentially, I'll just give a lay of the land, if you will, about the local news ecosystem here in New Jersey. Essentially, New Jersey, because of where we're located, of course, we're located between New York City and Philadelphia metropolitan area. So historically, we've been underrepresented as far as news coverage. So there can be a disconnect among communities in New Jersey as far as how we're reflected in the news. In particular, over the course of our research, for example, in South Jersey, residents often complain that, we only have these outlets kind of swoop in to our communities when they want to report on, crime stories or maybe the more negative aspects or the headline-grabbing stories, but they don't really reflect our real experience, our day-to-day experiences as residents in our communities. So jumping around a little bit, New Jersey, the news landscape in New Jersey is such that it's still trying to recover from basically the massive downsizing of the industry that's been taking place over the past 20 years or so. So you have one major shift that took place in 2011 was when the state, which had operated and subsidized public television and radio stations in New Jersey, decided that it no longer wanted to continue on with that investment. And so ultimately those 9 stations were parceled off and were acquired by WHYY based in Philadelphia and New York Public Radio. So in addition to the change in terms of the ownership of regional media outlets, you had the loss of advertising revenue, and you had a number of news publications essentially shutter and close down because they just couldn't afford to continue operating. In the midst of this, I should note that while we do have a thriving network of hyperlocal publications throughout the state, New Jersey has 564 municipalities. So, it's like the coverage is still, tremendously uneven. So the center works to try to support publications in addressing the various communities throughout the state. Within that, the center has done some research and identified at least 140 ethnic and community media outlets throughout the state. And within this group, as I mentioned, there's at least a dozen Black-led, Black-owned publications that we've identified and tried to strike up relationships with. So these are publications that are basically, led by a small team of people who are just passionate about getting the information out to their communities. They are kind of struggling financially. They're struggling to build, become sustainable as news organizations. And we're fortunate, I'm fortunate to build relationships with Josie and Penda and Mr. Thomas as well, to try to support the work that the press is doing, that the Black press is doing in New Jersey. So the Center for Cooperative Media has a lot of different programming, but this opportunity to work with Black publishers in the state is one that is near and dear to my heart. And obviously, as Josie was saying, as someone who's in the trenches helping to build a Black-led publication as well, I strongly identify with some of the issues that members of the Black press have, and continue to grapple with. So there's a few more things I want to say about research that has been done about the...
Bring the mic closer. Thank you.
Sure. A few more things I want to say about research that has been done as far as identifying how Black Americans respond to how we're covered in the press. And so if you'll bear with me, I want to highlight a couple of things from a study recently conducted by the Pew Research Center. I think it's not even 2 weeks old, where essentially they say that, thank you. Among the key findings, they surveyed 5,000 people, and among the key findings among the respondents were that Black media publishes as much as 6 times the amount of coverage on issues important to the Black community, such as racism, health disparities, voting access, as compared to the mainstream media. Black media centers the community and humanizes Black people and organizations. And Black media includes historical context in the coverage of present-day challenges. So that actually, if you can't tell that I'm a little nervous, that actually was from a 2021 study conducted by the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at CUNY, when they looked into they produced a report that looked into why Black media matters now. I know everybody in this room has a reason why Black media matters to us. So I don't need to necessarily tell you that, but I just wanted to highlight the work of people who have tried to answer that question based on statistics. What the Pew Research Center has found is that Black Americans are very dissatisfied with how we're covered in news media. We view this coverage as more negative, incomplete, stereotypical, missing important information about us as compared to any other racial or ethnic groups. So we don't see ourselves and we don't see our humanity in the news cycle and in mainstream media. And when we are depicted, 43% of those surveys say that the coverage was largely stereotypical. We often encounter racially insensitive news about Black people for various reasons. It could be due to the agenda of an outlet. It could be due to the lack of diversity in the staff where there aren't many Black people in the newsrooms. And it could be due to the speed of the news cycle and the pressure to rush the story out. Basically, it's pretty pessimistic. 14% of those surveys said that they're highly confident that Black people will be covered in the near future, so that we'll see this change occur in our lifetime. What I want to do is continue to have this discussion of what is our vision then, or how can we move forward and help to change some of this, the outlook, and to boost the services that we can offer to these audiences that are so underserved by the mainstream media.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to move on, but just a couple of quick comments. One is that the impetus for a lot of Black press was the fact that the way we were perceived, that we weren't human, that we were animals, that was a definite thing for the press to say, wait a minute, we got to tell our own story. And not only us, it was the Mexicans and it was also indigenous people. In order to shape certain perceptions, that's what was done. The other thing that you mentioned, how we tell the stories. Some journalists are very lazy. They go to the police department. It's real easy to get a story, and then that's the story they tell, the one from the police department, right? So that's a sign of a lazy journalist because they never go behind. So it's important for people to know that reporting crime all the time in us is just a lazy way out of doing your job, and I think that's important. So Josie, in terms of all these things, there was a major pivotal point, and it had to do with the Federal Communications Commission, right? So you want to tell the audience what is the FCC short, and what role it played.
Sure,
in
I want to pick up on a few things that Cassandra shared. So the FCC really is the governing body of how we understand ourselves in the press, in the media. They control how democracy is expressed. So if you're interested in, there's a huge conversation going on about the press and the media, and we need to invest more in local press because we see the eroding of our democracy. Well, we also need to hold accountable the commissioners who sit on the FCC. And here are a couple of things, or like three things that what we've seen the FCC sort of double down on. One is the issue around ownership. And Cassandra sort of touched on this, right? So the increase in consolidation of media and the narrowing on ownership. So that means that a lot of us are eliminated in the possibility of owning a radio station or a broadcasting entity. I think the last research showed that we're 15% of the population, and we have like 0.4% of ownership in media. And that goes to the other two pieces, right? Sort of, there's no public interest oversight. So if you narrow public interest oversight, then the opportunity for licensing to go to far richer stakeholders, eliminating the possibility of non-white communities to have access to ownership happens. And then, the FCC sort of turned its eye away from non-white communities and the opportunities for us to participate in a rigorous press space and sector. That takes money, that takes investment, then that takes support, which is why it's so critical for the Black press. We can't compete with larger institutions, and we can't compete with a lot of other sort of non-white sectors, right? Certainly with white ethnic media, we can't compete, but even with other sort of non-white media outlets. It costs money. When Cassandra talks about the kind of work that we're producing, it costs money. It costs money for editors, for writers, for research, for providing the absolute best journalism output that we can possibly produce. So that's why it takes public policy. As advertising dollars have decreased, as sponsorship dollars have decreased, as we've narrowed democracy by narrowing media, it's going to take public policy. And so a large part of what we will talk about today and what we hope will impart to you, the audience, is that it will take you making demands on elected officials to invest in the black press, not just in local news, but to really invest dollars and cents in building a black press. So of the black media institutions you see here and the others that Cassandra sort of referenced, we're not, our combined budget will shock you. And it's not going to be in double-digit millions. It's going to be under 10 million. That's shocking. Yet it's demanded that we participate in this space so that we ensure that our stories are being told. So that's a critical piece. And to pick up on something Cassandra sort of referenced, which is the Pew Charitable Trust, one of the pieces that came up in that research is that for us as black people, we're not interested in who the journalist is or the ethnic background of the journalist. I differ with that. I think it's really important for us to tell our stories. Because as Martin Luther King said, I think one of the critical things that he left us is that he thought he was integrating us into a burning building. And when you integrate into a burning building, when you release the power of your story, the power of your narrative, when you don't care who tells your story, that's a burning building. And so we can't have conversations about issues around, let's say one of the big ones is reparations. We can have conversations about reparations if we're not telling the story of reparations. If other people are framing the discussion for us, then we're not participating in the negotiations.
Well, we're going to move on, but before we do, because we're using some terms that are close to my heart.
Oh, sorry.
One was the term media and press. First of all, I tell my students all the time, they're two different things. The role of the press is to educate the citizenry so you know when the other branches of government are not acting in your stead. That requires a educated citizenry, right? So that's the role of the press. That's why it's in the First Amendment, not the second, not the third, it's the first, right? And that's the significance of it. And I mentioned the post office because there would be no press getting to people if it wasn't for that post office, except for us. We had other ways to do it. So I just wanted to make that point. The other part that Josie kind of hit on was civics, right? You cannot make elected officials accountable if you think they're leaders. When they're not leaders, their job is to do what you say. That's their role. But you have to know what to tell them to do and how to make them do it to get the policies that need to happen in order to have the allocations of tax money support the black press. So, having said that, now I'm going to turn around and talk to Mr. Howell. And Mr. Howell is going to talk about, amongst other things, he's going to discuss what we need, what the black press needs from black people. Mr. Howell, here, you can have it.
Hello, what do we need from black folks? The first thing that comes to my mind as a publisher is engagement. Far too often, we're not getting the type of engagement that we need from the community, and I know that goes to the type of reporting that's being done, right? So news and information that's done well, no matter what color you are, is important. And so that's a priority for all of us on stage here, right? Content is king, and it must be done well. But furthermore, it must be news and information that's important to me, that edifies me and my community, and that can add capacity to my decision-making as a person, as a father, as a husband, as a member of the community. What does it add to me personally, right? So that's just as important, and I get that when we're producing the kind of content that we feel like is important to you. But engagement is something that's so vital for us. To touch on money for a little bit, one of the reasons why it's very easy for corporations to not do business with us is because they don't see the engagement numbers on our end when we approach them about advertising and sponsorship and partnership opportunities. And that is a real easy way for them to close the door on us when we're doing quality work, we're producing the same type of work that all other media publications are producing, investing the same resources that everybody else is investing, and our audience it's shown that our audience over-engages with our content when they do get it. But because the numbers and statistics don't back that up on the general scale, it affords an opportunity for them to close the door on us. So that's the first thing that I think about when I think about what can the community do to help us. Engage with us. Pick up our newspapers, read our websites, engage with our newsletters, fill out the surveys when we send them to you about what it is that you'd like to see us cover more of on a weekly basis. What news and information is important to you? Those are some of the things that I can think of. I forgot your second part to your question, if there was a second part.
Well, you talked about some of the significance of our newspaper in terms of cultural that you and I talked about when we first met the other day.
Right. So so just to go back a little bit, as I said, I started out in general market media, 8 years with North Jersey Media Group over in Hackensack, but I spent 18 years with the New York Amsterdam News, which is probably one of the most famous black newspapers in the country, right? I was a senior vice president of a whole lot of stuff there, advertising partnerships, strategic relationships, et cetera. One thing that astounded me with the community and the support they gave to the publication was that it spoke to them in their narrative from people that looked like them, tasted like them, understood their perspective and their lifestyle, could tell a story from their perspective, and it was something that they could relate to. It helped tell the truth about what was happening in our community. So too often in general market publications, the narrative around communities of color was what bad was happening in the community, right? When we all know that's not the real narrative of the community. There's so many good things happening in the community, and those are the stories that are important to us to edify and what helps to shape the narrative locally, regionally, and nationally about us as a people. So those are just some of the things that I think are important as well.
Well, there is one more thing he'll talk about, and that's Stuff Magazine. And the reason why is, I don't know, for those of you older may remember that in Newark, and I remember like heroin addicts used to read the newspaper every day. And I remember going into the bar not to get alcohol. I probably was getting something out of there. And I remember people sitting at the bar reading Stuff Magazine, but there was a reason that I found out from him, and he's younger than me. And I want him to just tell you the significance, the cultural significance of that, because that contributed to the black middle class at that time.
Right. So Linda's talking about number running. And what a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of the black newspapers back in the day, the winning numbers were published in the classified and the sports section of the newspapers back then. And back then, early on, number running was not illegal. It only became illegal when it became too lucrative for black folks. And then guess who took it over? Can I get anybody to answer that question? Who took it over? Anybody? The government. The government. They're still doing it, but the government now is the biggest number runner in the world. Right? Isn't Powerball $1.3 billion? That's the number. That's where that originated from. So, and more people won. That's right.
So we're going to talk about content a little bit, and I say that because you're in South Jersey, and so the content may be a little different. But the reason why I say that, I ran into two young people, and I noticed that, and I thought about it from the vantage point, when you watch the weather, right? And those of you old enough know we didn't have tornadoes in New Jersey. We had hurricanes, but we didn't have tornadoes. And so they'll just say, there's a tornado coming, find somewhere safe. First of all, there are a lot of new places that don't have basements because it's not profitable, right? So people don't really know where to go. So I'm thinking this term content, and I'm talking to young people, and a lot of young people have either been socialized. I knew they didn't like history because I teach history, and so I knew that was hard because the way they were socialized is not to like it because they didn't think it related to them, but we got over that. But the other part is they're, especially this generation now, the high school students and the college students, they want everything quick because social media, everything is really quick. But when you talk to them, if you give them context, I learned this from my 13-year-old grandniece, when you give them content, they're like, oh, that's so much information. They don't like content. But that's because they're not socialized to accept it. So we're talking about content and how important it is. And if you have a generation that's like, wait a minute, that's too much information, what do we do? And talk about content from, oh,
It's very interesting you share that you're bringing that issue up. I was at the table with the young ladies from Patterson High School. And I was telling them 8 years ago, we met a woman named Laura Wooten, who was the oldest serving poll worker in the United States of America. So we went and told her her story. So we took it upon ourselves to get the Laura Wooten bill passed in the Senate, and it's something that the civics is mandatory to be taught in the classroom. And we took that charge. We didn't have all the resources, but we believe we can do it. So we did it. So I just happened today talking to a professor at Rutgers, and now they're trying to pass a Laura Wooten bill in higher education. So this is something that we took upon ourselves. And I met her, and she adopted me as her son. When I joined church again, she came in as my mother because my mother passed away. So before she passed away, I told her this is what we're going to do. So now they have a building named after her, the Laura Wooten building at Princeton University. So we can make a difference. To me, I look at business like sports. What is your strength and what are your weaknesses? So we have to go where our strengths are. I mean, to me, that's just very simplistic to me. So I believe we have a great opportunity to really change the mindset of how media is, because New Jersey become more culturally diverse ever before. And the mainstream newspapers really don't cover our community the way they do. They do a little stuff here and there, but they don't do the hard story about the Laura Wootens. So I really believe there's a great opportunity for us. You know, the sky's not falling. There's great opportunity for us, and we collectively had to sit down and look at our strengths that we do have. Like, for example, our last issue, we did a special edition on African American female doctors. So we want the young females to say, I want to be like her because I look like her. So that's what we're doing. We're doing the same thing with African American male doctors. So we just had to be very creative. So I'm a firm believer, you know this, Benda. I believe there's advertising dollars out there and sponsorship dollars, but you got to find a way to just change the way people do things. You can't just normally do the same old Black History edition or Martin Luther King edition. You have to do something totally out the box. So we're planning to do a special edition on Agent of Change. So we're going to talk about Mr. Hamilton, who drafted the Constitution of South Jersey back in 1947. He was a brother, and he was able to convince the Jim Crow politicians to go along how the Constitution should be written in New Jersey back in 1947. So those are some of the things that we're planning to do. I'll just keep my mouth shut at this point.
No, it's interesting you say that, because the reason why New Jersey's Constitution is equal to the United States Constitution, I think, is because in 1947, everybody was required to have civics. So that you had an educated population to make sure our Constitution was. And you also mentioned this as an aside, but the first Black person to vote came out of Paterson, New Jersey.
Yes, Laura Wooten worked the polls for 78 years. And when she was 82, she walked 5 miles to open the poll. 5 o'clock in the morning, and the day prior, her brother passed away.
Yeah.
So these are stories that no one knows except us. So we're very proud of what we do. And like I say, again, no matter what you do in life, you got to look at your strength and your weakness and go where your strength is. I might not be able to play defense, but I can shoot the jump shot or whatever.
And again, whoever writes the story is determined outcome. Whoever is the first draft of history comes out of the media. Well, I'm sorry, the press. The media's job, I didn't say that before, but the media's job is to advertise to get you to buy things. The role of the press is to educate you. Two different things. Educate you versus get you to spend money. Got it? All right. So on that note, we're going to tap a little while, and we're going to take some questions. But beforehand, I want everybody to comment on what is this you want people to leave with. I know that, what's his name? I'm sorry. I know Mr. Howe kind of talked about what we need from the public. We need citizenship. We need you to make elected officials accountable. We need to make sure that they allocate our tax dollars to the black press. Because there are tax dollars. We should have a say in where they go. So on that note, I'm going to start with Cassandra, because she's the youngest, and have her respond. And then we'll just go in order, and then we'll take some questions. Cassandra, anything you want to leave?
Okay. What I would say is I'm going to echo Penda and say that we definitely want you to support these outlets. Their ability to continue on and continue to serve our communities depends on your engagement with them. So look at the list there that we've shared with you today. You know, jump on the websites, read their stories, give them feedback. Because these are the institutions also, these organizations, Black-led newsrooms are training and creating opportunities for Black journalists, you know, emerging journalism professionals, emerging content creators and storytellers, for example, at the newsroom at Public Square Amplified. And Kelly is representing today. So we want to support these young people and really help them to get that first internship, get that first fellowship, and give them the opportunities to tell these kinds of stories, because they're not represented necessarily in the mainstream media, and they're not necessarily represented in the newsrooms at the commercial outlets. So if we as members of the Black press, we're wanting to serve the community by providing content, providing information, we should also want to serve the community by training up a new group of journalists who will tell these stories, who know the people in the community, and who can, you know, kind of rise up in the ranks and create opportunities for others. We saw the statistic about how, 14% of us are optimistic that we will see a change in how Black communities are covered in our lifetime. Okay, but that doesn't mean we have to accept that. I saw another part of that Pew study that said that, as far as Black consumers, news consumers, they think that news outlets will go a long way if they just make sure that the reporters are aware of the issues. Or collaboratives that are headed up by Black news organizations, such as Word in Black and other collaboratives. And, it could look like the solutions that we haven't heard yet from this growing group of publishers in our state. So I'm really excited to see what comes out of this. And I look forward to working with members of the community to have voice. And yes, lift your voices in support of the policies that do support the Black press.
I would just add that it's not just economic, even though we know that's important in this economy. It's about, if you think of indigenous people, think 7 generations, right? Your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, your great-great-grandchildren, your great-great-great-great-grandchildren. We need to be thinking about the generations to come. The stories that they hear about, like the stories that you hear. You know, we have an opportunity to go to the library and see stories that were written by slave narratives, things of that sort, because during the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt thought it was important to put people back to work. So he had artists go out and take those stories, right? But we have to think about sustaining our culture. We have a rich and texture. We cannot give that up. We need to make sure we're training people to be griots, you know, because this is a way. The griot is a source of communication, communicating to the young people. So it's not just economic investment, it's an investment in our children. We can't complain if we're not preparing them for the future in all kind of ways. Okay, Josie Gonzalez.
So what I am excited about is the multi-dimensional editorial framework of the Black Publishers Collective. We are, and that's what's exciting, right? So when we think about this, we're covering multiple stories from different perspectives. We're not in competition with each other. We operate in news deserts, and when I say news deserts, I mean we operate in spaces where Black stories aren't being told. I'll give an example of this. So in Newark, 2 white outlets covered the reading test scores of 3rd graders just this past year. And they led with the headline, and the stories were short. They led with the headline that 19% of 3rd graders passed a reading test. And so when I saw that, my stomach was in just knots, because 81% of our children failed the reading test. And that's the real story, right? We built Public Square Amplified on volunteer labor. Young people showed up in the Public Square Amplified newsrooms without getting paid. And they went out onto the streets and they covered stories. And then we found editors who were willing to give of their time to edit those stories and train those young people. And so we published every week for close to 2 years. We will celebrate our 2nd anniversary on November 11th of this year. Young people are showing up, like Kelly and others, wanting to learn more about the press and learn more about narrative construction, learn more about how do I get to tell my story? How do I get to tell the story of my community? I believe that local news organizations are powerhouses. They're bases of power for community. And so the more you engage in news organizations like ours, the more stories we can tell, the more people we can reach with our stories. So I hope that, I hope, as Cassandra said, please take a look at the list, engage with the different Black publishers in the state, share our stories, send us notes, tell the elected officials, we've got all these Black publishers, we need to figure out how we invest in them. Better public policy will support local news organizations to tell more stories with depth so that you can see yourself in those stories.
Thank you. Mr. Howe.
Just to piggyback on something that you said, Cassandra, and it made me think about one of the main reasons why I wanted to start my own publication. When I started working at North Jersey Media Group about 29, 30 years ago, it astounded me the type of jobs that were available behind the scenes that nobody told me about and I didn't learn about in school. So there's these paginators that are making $120,000 a year, right? Taking care of their families after taxes. And I'm going into this building with 3,000 employees and there's 3 Black people, me being one of them. And everybody's driving real nice cars in the parking lot. And I'm saying to myself, how all these people making all this money? And once I got behind the scenes, I saw there's 20 different careers back here. I want to provide an opportunity for people that look like me to be exposed to this. Because these people are living well, they're taking care of their families, and they're having 20, 30, 40-year careers if you want to have it living very nicely. Why can't we provide an ecosystem like that for kids in our community so that they can be exposed to this and live the same type of lifestyle? So that was just as motivating to me. And then just to piggyback on something my brother Al said, I come from the business side of the media business. I understand clearly what the dollars are. I understand clearly where the marketers want to meet us at. And I'm going to position our product to take advantage of that opportunity to help support the infrastructure growth and the sustainability of our operation. Our journalists are going to get paid. They're not doing stories for free. And we have a level of excellence just like everybody else. We hold them to the same standards, right? But we're going to present opportunities for them to speak to our audience in the first person and not have opportunities to give us excuses.
Well, I guess I started this journey because I really want to make a difference in my community. But I understand there's a business side to it. And the challenge we have is trying to find that balance between your mission and to be a profitable business, because you're in business to make a profit. And I believe you got to believe in your product and you got to make a difference in your community. If you don't start with that premise, you're just doing it just to make money, I think you're going to fail.
Well, that was really good. Thank you, guys. Can I get a hand for them? Thank you. Well, before we take questions, anybody have any questions, please raise your hand. But I just want to leave you with something that I have been given to my students. I teach media, well, I don't teach media literacy. I learned about it, and I incorporate it in whatever I teach. I've taught stuff across the board, paralegal studies, history, film, English, all these different courses. No matter which one, I want young people to know how to evaluate the information. I don't want to be the person that they rely on. I want them to learn how to get it themselves. So I'll leave it with you guys. First, I'll say whoever's speaking, whether it's social media or newspaper, television, who's speaking? Who do they represent? And you can usually see that because there'll be a byline, right? What's the mission of the organization they work for? Where does the money come from for that organization? Because that's going to tell you who they're accountable to. And then there's the who, what, where, when, why, and how, because a lot of our students have not been taught to think like that. But that's okay. At the end, I ask them, based on the information that you've acquired, what impact, if any, has this had on you in your capacity as a citizen, a taxpayer, and a consumer? I leave you with that. Whenever you hear anybody talking, ask the question in your head. Who do they represent? What's the mission of the organization? Who's funding the organization? And then what impact does it have on you in your capacity, which we all are, citizens, residents, taxpayers, and consumers? On that note, we'll take some questions. I know you got questions. Yes, we have a question. I can hardly see you. So can you, okay. Go ahead. And who are you?
Good afternoon. My name is Thomas Varela. I'm with the New Jersey Black Empowerment Coalition and Affiliated Action Network. Was curious about how are you all contending with social media and a lot of these media platforms that are, for lack of a better word, branding themselves as journalists, but they are adding to the misinformation, adding to just the noise as it relates to how content is being dispersed. And, one can maybe make an argument that they're gaining more and more credibility in terms of just being a voice without the accountability in terms of what they are sharing.
So I like this question a lot. We're a grassroots activist newsroom. We're embedded in the activist community. And out of the activist communities comes citizen journalism. And citizen journalism has sort of manifested itself through these new portals that we have. And citizen journalism is valuable to our newsroom, right? So we use citizen journalists in our newsroom to tell stories. When we talk about one, engagement, one, second, support, three, those two things in building a black press, is that for many, those who will survive through the citizen journalism piece will be legacy news organizations who have the infrastructure, financial infrastructure, to support the absorption of citizen journalists. And so we see larger institutions collaborating with citizen journalists. On the local level, we're collaborating with citizen journalists as well. We're giving them a platform. We're also giving them rigor within a newsroom. So I see them as collaborators. They're not competitors. We've had citizen journalists from the time of Thomas Paine and Frederick Douglass and Ida B. Wells. Citizen journalism is rooted in the black community and the black experience in our history. We've always been citizen journalists. Journalism has sort of codified structures that we have sort of taken on. But we are, by definition, citizen journalists. We are, by definition, activists. As part of the oppressed class, it is through citizen journalism that we find our voice, that we own our narrative. So I welcome citizen journalists. They're in our newsroom, and they are of value. So absolutely, I encourage more of citizen journalists to work with us. Yeah, that's part of
Comments in like Media Takeout, World Star, a lot of these platforms that are inundated in our communities, and they are festering this sense of like muddying the waters as to like what's out there.
Yeah, sure. And that that happens when you don't have a free independent press, right? That happens when you don't have outlets or other resources. So then that becomes a central place where we gather news, which for many of us, and Professor Carter can speak more to this, but that's where propaganda festers, right? That's where we lose control of the narrative. So in building a black press and in building a free independent press, it affords us opportunities to interpret, to collaborate, and to address misinformation and disinformation. Because not all social media outlets are invested in the person who is telling the story, right? A lot of it is propaganda. So we have to also be careful about that, and that's a whole bit about media literacy.
I'd just like to add, I agree with everything Josie said, but also in every community, there's different levels of consumption, right? So, I have friends who are extremely successful and educated and get their news from World Star Hip Hop. I don't. It's entertainment. So it depends on what your consumption level is. If that's where you are from a consumption perspective, there's a place for you, and there will be a place for that. There always has been. But it isn't what we do. If you're very interested in reading a real story and a story that's been fact-checked and produced by real journalism with integrity and ethics, you're not getting that from World Star Hip Hop, right? You're gonna come to somebody that you respect. So there's gonna be a place for World Star Hip Hop, but the real journalism, it won't be living there. You'll find it on my site, and it'll take you back to the original source of the story on my other site.
Yeah. And to add to that, right, Charlemagne, The Breakfast Club is not sort of the news outlet, right? So there are many sort of YouTube personalities that present ideas about democracy and about civics. That's not news. And so Penda's making a critical point, that the reason that sort of Cassandra is here, right, to sort of affirm that. When you run a newsroom, you run it ensuring that you're adhering to editorial policies, ethics, and a variety of other guidelines that we have to follow. You also have to have insurance to protect you. So when Penda talks about it is rigor, when I say that it is rigor, it is hard work for small newsrooms, particularly the black press, to produce the quality of stories that we're producing. So yes, there's a role for citizen journalism, and we work with them, we collaborate with them, but Kelly is one of our citizen journalists, and Kelly's stories will not be published without rigor.
Before we go to Mr. Thomas, I just want to add, Josie mentioned propaganda, and people need to understand what that is. I'll just say quickly, there's a gentleman, if you don't know, you probably don't know him, but I'll throw it out. His name was Edward Bernays. He worked from before World War I all the way to the Clinton administration. He wrote a book in 1928 called Propaganda. He was masterful. He was masterful in moving a population to buy things they wanted versus what they needed. He's the architect of a consumer economy, basically. When you talk about advertising and marketing and public relations, Edward Bernays was also Sigmund Freud's nephew. He used that psychology to get the American public to do things that I call it the Beyonce, wherever the stars do. He was doing that during World War I. He got us into World War I. He got women to smoke cigarettes. If you look at old movies, you see everybody, Joan Crawford, all of them smoking cigarettes. That's Edward Bernays. He said women don't have a particular part on their body, so the cigarette the cigarette would kind of fill in that gap. His hardest job was to get women to use cake mix. That was his hardest job for Duncan Hines or the other one, Betty Crocker, right? He had a real hard time doing that because the socialization, he just couldn't get through it. But what he did on behalf of the corporations, because he worked for corporations all this time, what he did is he used egg, and some of you may be old enough, because I know I remember my mother with the egg and milk. Then we found out you didn't have the egg and milk, you only needed water. But that was his way to get women involved, because if they weren't involved, they weren't going to do it. So Edward Bernays, all this stuff, this ability to get you to do stuff. And what he did, he used your customs. He wouldn't sell pianos. He would say everybody has an extra room. If somebody else has a piano in it, you want it too. So he was masterful. And so he still pretty much controls the American public. When you talk about that publication and you talk about what's happening in the media, the social media, the lack of substance and things of that stuff, Edward Bernays is still behind us. He's still calling the shots. And, I refer you to him. And first, make sure if you want to find out who he is, you should look at the documentary his daughter did, because that was a relative. And I think that's probably more telling than anything anyone else has ever written about. Mr. Thomas.
Close out. Well, I'm just going back. My mentor was a gentleman named Dr. Nella Fitzhugh. He was the first African-American male to get an MBA from Harvard back in 1933. And he tells me a story back then. He couldn't get a job except as a liquor salesman, and they all fit in one van. So as the story goes along, Dr. Fitzhugh developed he was the genius of the target market news. He was the genius of marketing to African Americans. So he became a high-level African American at Pepsi Cola. He started off as the director of the Negro market, director of the Afro market, director of the black market, and director of the African American market. He also founded the black MBAs in Howard's Business School. But he was someone I could call anytime, and he would just share certain concepts with me, and it hasn't changed the concepts that he shared with me. He was a wonderful gentleman, brilliant, I mean, unbelievable brilliant. So if you get a chance, you can Google him, and he was just a joy to work with and learn. Thank you.
Yes, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Kelly McIntyre. I'm a community reporter at Public Square Amplified. A lot of young people tend to conflate the news with doom scrolling. Sorry.
Come up a little bit so everybody can hear you.
Sorry.
Not just us, everybody.
Sorry, y'all. Can you guys hear me? Alrighty. So a lot of young people tend to conflate the news with doom scrolling. They see the news as a negative source of information. So how do you believe that we as journalists can try to bridge the gap between, our audience and our target markets, as well as, young people who no longer really trust or want to read the news?
Okay, who's young enough to answer that? Yeah, I'm sure you have an answer. If you never asked a question you don't have an answer to, so I'm sure you're going to answer, but we'll see. We'll test them. Cassandra?
Oh, great. Okay, Kelly, I think I'm going to try to answer your question. So, by way of our experience with the South Jersey Information Equity Project, we work with early career journalists, and of course there's that age gap in terms of how that impacts how we consume news, how we view news outlets. And so sometimes there's resistance to do a more long form piece, for example, because they're just like, well, I can just do a TikTok about it, or I can just do something in a shorter format and just, punch through the main points of the story and get that out. I think there's a place for that. There is a place for content that is bite-sized and that gets the information out quickly, but I do think that should be the supplemental aspect of storytelling. So you should definitely still report out the story as you normally would, the who, what, when, where, why, how, that has been ingrained in us as reporters and journalists, and as Josie was talking about, the rigor, right? And I think that those can exist side by side. You have like the Washington Post, they have like TikTok accounts and people dedicated to producing that content. So, and then that exists for a purpose because they're trying to reach a certain younger demographic. And you can share key information points and be really targeted with that, and that's fine. But I really think that any program that seeks to train early career news professionals and storytellers should have them be able to fully report out stories, should provide training to support their multimedia skill sets, and also help with just like interviewing and relating to people, because as a reporter you have to build trust with the people that you're speaking to and your sources. And I think arguably pandemic has impacted how we socialize generally as people and members of society. And so you see this kind of like withdrawal and more so people just want to submit, like email their questions, for example, to people and have them respond. Not necessarily wanting to like, knock on doors and do that kind of, traditional reporting. But I think that, if we're trying to cultivate a cadre of reporters who can stand toe-to-toe with people who are in the mainstream newsrooms who don't necessarily look like us, we have to, these things have been codified. So we kind of have to learn what those rules are, so to speak, so we can figure out how to navigate them and repurpose them to serve our communities. I hope that answers your question.
Just real quick, I want to hear from older people. So we're going to start with Mr. Thomas. And then we're going to hear from Mr. Al, just briefly, with your responses to the question from this young person.
Okay. I got to hear the question again.
Well, you go first.
All right, so I'll jump in really quick, and I'll give you my perspective, because I think it's a good question. I think it goes to knowing and understanding your audience and understanding their consumption habits. That is a responsibility of ours as media owners, right? So that same story that's 800 to 1,200 to 1,500 words has to be shortened for social media. And I go back to my kids. I've always used them as test studies, right? So I've got a son who went to law school, and I've got a daughter who graduated from Medill School of Journalism, right, at Northwestern. I never saw them pick up a newspaper, but I'm a newspaper person. I still like turning the page my entire life. One day I saw my son reading his phone, and he said, oh yeah, I have a subscription to the New York Times. And I said, why do you have a subscription to the New York Times? I never saw you pick up a newspaper. And he said, well, because in the app, I can get through the story in 2 to 3 minutes. And it's a story that I'm interested in. So they invested in a survey company in a room like this with a group of young students, and they found out what their consumption habits were and what they were interested in reading. And those stories were written specifically for that audience to be delivered specifically on that medium. That's work that we have to do.
Well, you know, I use my kids to taste study as well because I have twins that are in college, and it's very interesting. They do everything on social media, but it's something they're very, very interested in. They will go and do their additional research on newspapers. So it just blows me away. They said that I don't read newspapers, but it's something they're very, very interested in. They will go the next step and really read newspapers. So I don't know.
Yeah, you know, Kelly.
Wrap up from the question period.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to thank all of you who stayed. I hope this was instructive and that you'll share this information with your family, members of your religious organization, everybody on your block, everybody in your building, to share this information. Really appreciate you guys staying. Thank you so much. And give yourself a hand.